Have you ever had one of those hikes where everything that could go wrong did go wrong? Well, today we're diving into 5 hiking fails that have taught me some invaluable lessons.
This looks strangely familiar.
It's because we've been here before. We're going in circles.
And these just aren't stories, they are your ticket to safer, smarter adventures. Stick around and I'll give you a bit of knowledge that could help you on your next hike. Hi everyone, Mauser here, your go-to channel for all things hiking, gear reviews and little adventures. And after 30 years of hiking across Tasmania and beyond, plus my time as a hiking guide, I've seen just about everything. But you know what? Some of my biggest lessons came from some of my personal biggest blunders. Whoa, you right? So grab your trail mix and let's go down a bit of memory lane down some of the path of some of my past mistakes as well as some that I've seen. Let's get straight into it with 5 hiking fails and what they taught me. Let's go. First up, fail number 1 is slipping and falling. Now my friends that are watching this, they're going to have a good old laugh here because behind my backs, I know they do this, they laugh a bit because I always seem to be slipping over and tumbling over when we're out in some pretty rough terrain. Now picture this, you're heading down a nice little descent off a little tarn that you've just camped at the night before and you're going over some pretty rough, rugged terrain. There's no track, it's scrubby and there's lots of rocks around and it's quite steep. We just left camp, fast forward a few minutes, and there's your mate Mauser rolling down the side of a steep decline down the side of a hill out in the middle of southwest Tasmania. Finishing up, I was there sprawled on the ground, having slipped on a loose rock and tumbling head over tail a few metres down the terrain. I sat up, looked around and started questioning my life choices. And what did I learn this time around on this tumble? Well, it was that if you rush in unknown terrain, you could hurt yourself. Always pay attention to the terrain and watch your footing. Wear footwear with good grip. That's going to help a bit. Bring some trekking poles for a bit of extra stability. They make a big difference when you're going down big declines, especially on uneven terrain. And where possible, maintain that sort of 3 points of contact when you're going down and when you're going up. And if you're wondering how do you prepare for tricky terrain? Well, first up, you can wear shoes with excellent traction that are designed for hiking. I prefer ones with a Vibram sole. I find that is super grippy and works really well. It didn't in that instance for me, but it does work particularly well, especially on wet, slippery surfaces. And just take your time and be mindful of where you're stepping. Keep your focus on the trail, especially on those particularly challenging and technical sections. Where you are exposed, where you've got rock, where you're on a slope, be particularly attentive to that situation. Watch how other people are crossing that terrain if they're ahead of you. And if I do get to a particularly tricky section of track, an exposed section, I'm there sort of looking at it before I charge straight in and just thinking what is the best way to approach this little section. Where I find I do tumble and where I do get into trouble is where my mind is wandering, where I'm not paying full attention to the task at hand, and that is where I find I can get myself into trouble. Also, if you're stopping to look at your phone, to look at a map, or to do anything like that, stop on the track, have a look, then move on. I often see people tripping over if they're there looking down at something or they're off looking into the distance at something. That is when you can also trip yourself up. And sometimes you can even just feel just a bit uneasy on your feet. There mightn't be any particular reason, and I know this is the way I did feel one day when I actually broke my ankle. It was winter, it was very slippery, and I just didn't feel sure on my feet all day.
I think I've severely done something to my ankle. I just slipped on a rock back there. It's very slippery, and it slid forward and bent a funny way, and I heard something crack big time. I don't know if it was a stick or my leg, but it's really painful.
And I probably should have just stopped and had a bit of a break for a while just to recoup my thoughts and just to think about what I was doing. So if you're feeling uneasy, take a breath, take a breather, take a break and just think about what you've got coming up ahead and have a talk to your hiking buddies. It'll just help you get that confidence back if you're feeling a bit uneasy on your feet today. And if that doesn't help, then just really take your time and be really careful. But we move on. And the next one that I have had experience with, limited experience fortunately, but that is getting lost. And for myself, while it's only been on a couple of limited occasions, only for a very brief time, I have been lost and it is not a nice feeling, even for a short few minutes.
Where are we, man? I don't know, man.
One particular time we were on a very familiar area. We'd been there before, but the mist rolled in on this morning. We continued on the path, on the line that we had chosen. We didn't refer to our maps when the mist rolled in, and when you know it, within an hour, we thought we better check where we are. The mist cleared, we had a look around, and nothing was familiar. I looked across at a peak I had climbed before and didn't recognise it, and I couldn't figure out where I was because I thought that peak was in the completely opposite direction. I'd become disoriented and unfamiliar with where I was. But we were lucky that the mist cleared. We pulled out our maps, we pulled out our navigation devices, had a look at where we were and figured out where we were, only to find we had just walked in a massive big circle on a little plateau. Welcome back. Well, I don't know where we left you last time, but we've just been walking around in circles in the mist. Vincent, we've come up onto the peak, Magnet Crag over there somewhere, and then we walked all the way over there, just wandered around. So what did I learn from this? Well, overconfidence is a silent killer on the trail. I thought I knew where I was. We both thought we knew where we were. But when we did think that maybe we were on the wrong track, on the wrong path, we probably continued on for a bit too long. We should have stopped there and then, looked at where we were on our maps, and then we would have figured it out earlier. So even when you are on familiar routes, you need to carry all the relevant navigation tools, and if you get an inkling that maybe you are off the trail, if you are off the track, if you're heading in the wrong direction, you need to refer to that stuff straight away. Carry the navigation tools and actually use them. And as I learned on this particular trip, landmarks, even if you're familiar with them, can look very different in changing weather conditions and seasons. So then I hear you saying, well, what are the essential navigation tools that every hiker should carry? Very good question. Well, I think in this day and age, you definitely should have a GPS device of some kind, or a smartphone with offline maps. It is also important that you carry something like a personal locator beacon. I myself prefer the Garmin InReach Mini 2, but there's a variety of devices out there. Hire one if you have to, borrow one off a friend, but especially if you're going into the wilderness for an extended period of time, you should really be carrying one of these. If I want to go out for a day, my wife says, "Have you got your InReach?" It is a prerequisite with my family that I carry some sort of beacon communication device that enables me to communicate with them on a regular basis. It is also extremely helpful if you do get into trouble, you can communicate with emergency services, and if you're using the tracking functionality, if something happened, people can see where you last were if you are tracking regularly like I do. It gives my family peace of mind, and it gives me peace of mind too. But in addition to these, I always like to carry a physical map and a compass. It is very rare that I have to use a compass in this day and age, but I do like to have a map, more for the fact that I just love looking at a paper map. But I do think it is important to carry that map in case my phone failed, in case my beacon failed. In the worst case scenario, I've still got a map, I've still got a compass, and I know how to use them. And while this next one hasn't affected me so much, because I'm generally very well prepared for walks, I have seen it affect others, especially in the news. And that one is poor communication. And this is something I've often seen, and I've seen it when I've been working as a guide as well. And one particularly comes to mind. I was guiding some people around the side of a peak called Cradle Mountain here in Tasmania one day, and all day the rescue helicopter had been circling overhead, obviously looking for someone. And as I walked along, guiding my group, watching the helicopter above, another walker appeared in front of me, came up to me and said, "Are you a hiking guide?" I said, "Yes, how can I help you?" He says, "That helicopter is actually looking for me. I rang the search and rescue earlier today because I hurt my knee up on the mountain. But now my knee feels okay, so I'm walking out." And me, standing there, looked at him a bit dumbfounded. He'd decided to move on, but hadn't communicated to the search and rescue that he'd called earlier that he was now departing and walking out and he didn't need their assistance. So instead, the chopper was there circling around for quite some time. I was able to make contact with the search and rescue and tell them to call it off because I'd just spoken with the walker, told the walker to contact the emergency services when he finished the walk in an hour or two's time. But that is just one experience I've had amongst quite a few, and it just highlighted to me the planning that I go into before each trip is really important. And what is that planning, you ask? Well, I always leave a detailed itinerary of where exactly I'm going, where I'm going to be parking my car, the walk I'm going on, who I'm going with, and what my potential route options are. If they may be different to my primary route, what the other things I might be doing are. I leave copies of these with my wife and with my family, along with friends who know the area where I'm going to. That way, if there is an incident that does occur, they are well prepared to inform the authorities of what is going on, where I am, and if I have my beacon with me, my Garmin InReach, which is tracking me regularly, if something happened, they can tell the authorities exactly where I am at that point in time. And this was highlighted no better than when back around 2012, I had a person unknown to me that I didn't know report me missing because they saw me go out on a walk, a particularly hard walk. They saw us depart, and then we didn't come back the same day, so they assumed we were missing. We're in fact going away for a few days. It was unnecessary for this gentleman to call the police on us, but he did anyway. He called the search and rescue, and they rocked up at my house at midnight that night to scare my wife and report me as missing. To which my wife said, well,
He's not missing. Here's his itinerary. This is where he planned to be today. I had a text message from him earlier today, and everything should be fine.
so even in an instance like that, where someone reported me as missing, I wasn't actually missing. I'd been in regular contact with my loved ones in the outside world and prevented a potential search and rescue mission. It left my wife feeling maybe,
I hope he isn't lost, because then I've just told the police to go away.
but she did communicate to me fairly quickly to say what was going on, and I was able to say, no, it's all good. So again, maintaining those lines of communication is pretty important, and leaving your trip intentions, well, that is just key to trip planning and preparation. So how can you ensure that you stay connected and safe during a hike? Well, even if you don't have satellite messengers and that sort of thing, leave someone a little plan of your route, your trip intentions, your expected departure time, your expected return time, and what to do in the instance that you don't return by a certain time. Give a detailed itinerary, but ideally you're going to be carrying that personal locator beacon and a messaging device that will allow you to communicate in the event of an emergency. And if you are carrying your phone with you, then make sure you take a backup small battery of some sort that will enable you to charge it if it goes flat. Next up, overpacking. This is something I am awfully guilty of on many times. And especially when I haven't been hiking for a few months, I'll let stuff creep into my pack that maybe doesn't need to be there, and I'll head out with a heavier pack than what it needs to be, and I'll feel it straight away. And within a day or two, I'll be pretty sore in the hips because I'm carrying extra weight that I probably didn't need to. What can you learn from this? Well, use a packing list. I've said this before, but use a packing list, use a gear list, and prioritize what you need to take, but don't skimp on the essentials. Also, do a pack or two before you head on the hike, in the days leading up to the hike. Put it on, check how it feels, ensure that the pack is fitting well. And believe me, when you pack well, when you stick to your gear list and get that refined, you'll be surprised at how much weight you can save in your pack. But how do I avoid overpacking on a hike? Well, as long as I'm using my gear list and putting it into my things like my spreadsheet or to Lighter Pack or Pack Wizard, those apps that can help you just refine your gear list, you will find you are much better organized and you won't be weighed down by a heavy pack. It's generally on those times where I pack without using those devices, or I'm going on a shorter walk, or I think I know what I'm doing, I end up throwing in lots of extra stuff. And that brings us to our final one, which is underestimating the trail. Now, this has definitely happened to me before, where I've set out on quite a big trip, multiple days, and we've planned for a big day in the middle of a walk somewhere, and we've totally underestimated the time it would take to complete that day's walk. There was one day in particular to a very remote peak where we maybe underestimated our abilities on this day. We did the day, but it was a battle. And the main issue we found, and we knew it was going to be an issue, was water. Now, this peak was renowned as being a difficult peak. We knew that, we were prepared for it, but even being prepared for it, at the end of the day, we were exhausted. We'd maybe pushed the boundaries. We kind of assumed we would find some water somewhere. We even had information that there was a spot with some water. We went out on this massive day, huge day, started early morning as the sun was rising. We reached our objective, had lunch, turned around, and we still had another 6 or 7 hours walking to go, having already walked that same amount of time. On the way back, we found our water source, but there was a problem. It was some 5 meters below us at the bottom of a cliff, which we couldn't access. This bit of information would have been crucial in our planning. As a result, we were very thirsty, we were out of water, it was a hot day. Luckily, we found a small soak somewhere and we got some water. But the only thing that saved us here was our experience and our endurance from having previously completed many trips like this. And at the end of that day, the sun had set, we came in the dark, and we made it back to our campsite, but it was a hell of a day, and I just thanked that I had enough previous experience to make it through to the end of this day, if you know what I mean. So how can you avoid a similar experience when you are out on the trail? Well, research the trail you're going on thoroughly before you go. Know things like the distance, the elevation gain, and the difficulty level of the walk you are going on. Start with trails that match your fitness level. Don't go and do some big crazy walk if you've never really done any hiking before. Start with something easy and gradually build up your experience to the harder ones. And learning from my experience, never underestimate your water needs. There is nothing worse than being thirsty and dehydrated on a long walk, especially in hot weather. And well, how do you prepare for the trail's difficulty level? Use online resources, use local guidebooks, talk to people that have been there before, talk to park rangers, seek advice before you go. Do some training. If you haven't been hiking much, do some training before you go. I always am training for the next hike. I try and keep a baseline of fitness and then really work up my training in the lead up to a big walk. And especially in the summer, always carry a little bit more water than you think you're going to need. And try to figure out where the water sources are along your walk and if you can access them. If you do all of that, then hopefully you'll be well prepared and avoid some of the failures I have made and seen. So there you have it, 5 of the bigger hiking fails I have experienced and seen, and the invaluable lessons that they have taught me. If you found these tips helpful, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, sign up to the newsletter below, as well as in that QR code. And if you want a bit more, then check out this video where I go into a few other hiking bits and pieces.